When we think of ancient Rome, it's always the same story. Gold-covered emperors, epic gladiators, and wild parties where people ate so much they had to puke just to keep going. Yes, that was a thing. But let's be real, that's like only showing billionaire lifestyles and pretending everyone lived that way. The truth. Most Romans didn't have a palace, weren't training to die in the Colosseum, and definitely weren't lounging on velvet cushions eating grapes all day. If you think modern working life is tough, buckle up. Living in Rome was basically a mix of Stardew Valley, work until you drop, Dark Souls, death lurking around every corner, and a bad episode of Fixer Upper. They promised you a dream home, you got a collapsing shoebox. So forget the emperors and conquering armies. Today, we're talking about the people who actually made Rome work, the poor and middle class. And spoiler alert, it wasn't pretty, but it sure was interesting. Let's go! Hey Discovers, real quick before we dive back in, I've got a small favor to ask. If you love historical curiosities, epic battles, crazy mysteries, and mind-blowing stories that most people don't know about, then hit that subscribe button right now. That way, you won't miss any of our new videos and can keep uncovering insane facts every week. And of course, smash that like button. It really helps the channel grow and brings you even more awesome content. Alright, let's jump back into history. Imagine you move to a big city and need a cheap apartment. Now imagine the only option is a poorly built, overcrowded death trap that could collapse or catch fire at any moment. Congratulations! You just rented an insula, the Roman Airbnb from hell. Insulae were Rome's apartment buildings, usually 5 or 6 stories high. And considering Romans weren't using reinforced concrete, it's a miracle they even stood up at all. If you lived on the top floor, congrats again! You paid less, but you were basically gambling on whether your home would still exist tomorrow. And if you think sharing an apartment today is rough, try this on for size. No running water. If you wanted water, you had to haul it from a public fountain. Bathrooms. If you were lucky, there were public latrines. If not, the streets were your toilet. Need to get rid of waste? Easy, just chuck it out the window. Yep, Rome's streets were basically biological landmines. Fires. These buildings were so flammable that catching fire was practically a weekly event. Nero might not have burned down Rome himself, but he sure knew Insulae were bound to go up in flames sooner or later. Basically, living in an insula was like renting an apartment in a condemned building, except with gladiators on the corner and corrupt senators running the show. Fun times, right? If working today feels tough, imagine a time with no labor rights, no weekends, and a boss who could literally sell you into slavery if they didn't like your work. Welcome to ancient Rome's job market. Most workers were part of the plebe class. Not rich, not slaves, just screwed. They kept the city running, and the job menu was interesting to say the least. Construction workers. No hard hats, no safety, just pure bravery. Fall off some scaffolding? The law of gravity terminated your contract immediately. Cart drivers and haulers, basically Uber drivers, but pulling carts instead of cars and with zero GPS to navigate Rome's chaotic traffic. Blacksmiths, bakers, and craftsmen, hammering metal, baking bread, or making pottery that nobody really appreciated. Shopkeepers and tavern owners, trying to sell food and booze to customers who were always broke. Now, if you were into alternative careers, Rome had openings for street musicians, con artists, and even fake fortune tellers, because let's face it, there's always an audience for sketchy astrology. But could you climb the social ladder? Kinda. Some merchants got rich, and freed slaves could even become Roman citizens. But most of the time, life felt like Cyberpunk 2077. No matter how hard you worked, the system was stacked against you. And if you think your boss is terrible, just remember, in ancient Rome, getting fired could mean literally being dragged onto a slave ship. Best not to complain too much, huh? If you've ever been broke and survived on instant noodles and coffee, congrats. You've basically lived the budget edition of Roman life. Because trust me, the plebe diet was so bland it would make any fitness influencer cry. Main dish, bread. Side dish, more bread. Dessert, maybe slightly different bread, if you were lucky. The poor relied on Annona, a government program that gave out free grain. They'd grind it into flour and bake their own bread, because meat was a luxury only the rich could afford. Fruits and veggies, occasionally, but forget about a balanced meal. It was more like eat whatever's available and be grateful. Now, to keep people from rebelling, the empire had a genius distraction plan: bread and circuses. Simple formula: give people food, give people free entertainment, avoid riots and revolts. And the entertainment? A chaotic mix of UFC, the Hunger Games, and a particularly brutal season of Game of Thrones. The Colosseum was always packed because entry was free. After all, what better way to distract a starving population than by watching gladiators fight to the death? Rome figured out long before modern politicians that as long as you keep people entertained and minimally fed, they won't ask why senators are swimming in gold. The original political reality show. After a long day hauling stones, baking bread, or getting yelled at by your boss, you needed to unwind. But how do you have fun when you're broke? Easy. Pick from these creative options. Street performances and free theater. Rome knew people loved drama, so they put on free plays. The catch: these comedies were packed with crude jokes and political satire. Basically, ancient stand-up comedy. Except you couldn't get cancelled on Twitter. Gambling. The casinos of despair. If people today lose their paychecks on online poker, Romans were already doing that with dice games. Gambling was so addictive that the government tried banning it, and failed miserably. Because nothing beats the thrill of losing everything on a bad roll. Taverns. The OG dive bars. Taberni were the go-to hangouts. Cheap, crowded, and serving highly questionable wine. Perfect for venting about life, picking fights, and making bad decisions. The motto: when life sucks, drink cheap wine and pretend it doesn't. The Colosseum. Free entry, lifetime trauma. Plebeians got into the Colosseum for free. The only catch: the seats were terrible, like the worst spots at a rock concert. Gladiators, wild animals, and public executions, the ultimate entertainment for the masses. So, if you think fun is expensive today, remember, in Rome, free entertainment meant sketchy gambling, bad wine, and watching people get torn apart. Good times, or not. If there's one thing humans have always had, besides financial problems, it's superstition. And when it came to that, Roman commoners were basically world champions. They believed the world was full of gods and spirits, and that anything could bring bad luck. To keep misfortune at bay, everyone carried amulets, ranging from animal bones to bizarre little statues. Think of it as a lucky keychain, except if you lost it, you could blame all your misfortunes on it. Laras and Penates, Rome's version of guardian angels. Every Roman home had small household gods called Laras and Penates. They were like a mix of a patron saint and a security system. Before every meal, Romans would leave offerings for them. Think of it as a grandma's altar, except with mini-god statues that demanded bread as payment. Curses and lead tablets. Ancient Rome's version of Twitter. Feuds: if you had beef with someone, you didn't need to subtweet them. You just wrote their name on a lead tablet and asked a god to ruin their life. There were curses for everything, from "May Marcus never win another bet" to "May Julia's house burn down." Did they work? Well, at the very least, they probably made the target extremely paranoid. At the end of the day, poor Romans balanced backbreaking labor, cheap wine, and rituals to keep the gods from making their lives even worse. And let's be honest, not much has changed. People still blame the stars when life goes wrong. If you think gas station bathrooms are the peak of grossness, welcome to ancient Rome, where privacy was a luxury and sanitation barely existed. Public latrines, pooping in groups, literally. Going to the bathroom in Rome was a social event. Public toilets had multiple seats, side by side, with 0 dividers. Imagine chatting with your neighbor while both of you handled business. Now, the best part. No toilet paper. Instead, they used a shared wet sponge called a xylospongium. Yes, shared. When you were done, you rinsed it in dirty water and passed it to the next person. If this doesn't make you appreciate modern toilet paper, nothing will. Public baths. The real gossip hubs. If there was one thing Romans loved, it was public baths, thermi. But they weren't just for getting clean. These were places to hang out, make business deals, and gossip. Think of a bar, but with more steam and less alcohol. Medicine and healthcare. Ancient Rome's Gray's Anatomy. If you got sick, your options were a doctor who thought bad air caused diseases and prescribed incense as a cure, a surgeon who used wine as anesthesia and a blacksmith's knife for surgery, or just accepting your fate and hoping the gods took pity on you. Dentistry? Oh, it existed. But the standard procedure was yank it out and move on. So, if you've ever complained about hospital wait times or dentist bills, remember, it could be worse. You could be waiting in line for a Roman blacksmith to rip out your tooth with rusty pliers. At the end of the day, was life for Roman commoners really all that different from ours? Well, yes and no. Okay, today we don't have to share sponges in public bathrooms, thankfully, or watch gladiators fight to the death for fun, although the UFC is getting close. But aside from that, a lot hasn't changed. People worked all day and had to deal with shady bosses. Cities were loud, dirty, and full of problems. Governments kept people distracted with cheap food and free entertainment. Hello, TikTok and reality TV. Superstitions? Swap Roman amulets for crystals and astrology, and we have a perfect match. The truth is, humanity has always been driven by work, entertainment, and the eternal struggle to pay bills. The only difference is that now we have toilet paper, Wi-Fi, and healthcare that doesn't involve a drunk blacksmith. So next time you're having a bad day, just remember, it could be worse. You could be stuck in a collapsing wooden apartment, living off stale bread, and relying on a shady fortune teller for career advice. Ancient Rome may have fallen, but the struggles of the average worker? Those, my friend, are still going strong. Please leave a remark. If you liked this historical journey, please click the subscribe button. You'll be receiving much more fascinating history in the future.